Thank you. Yes, I think I'm allowed to preach every 2 years. I think it's been 2 years since. So, you know. Just before we start, has everybody got a copy of the leaflet we've prepared for today? Our topic, of course, is emotional healthy spirituality. But the heading on this is because our focus today is looking at what is emotional unhealthy spirituality. That's our starting point today. But it really is a privilege to be bringing this introduction and launch of this emotional healthy spirituality series to you. I'm excited about it, and I'm excited about the journey that we're going to go on together as a church as we work through this material. I guess I first read this material and Pete Caserio's books about 3 years ago, and I was incredibly impressed. Then 2 years ago, I went to hear Pete and Jerry Caserio as they came here to Christchurch on a one-day conference, and I went away buzzing, thinking, wow, this is the gift that our evangelical Pentecostal charismatic churches need. I wish I'd had it years ago. And I guess also over that time, I've been exploring what contemplative spirituality looks like. And so that has been part of my journey over the last couple of years. For those who don't know me, most of you do, I'm Carol, and I am the trust manager here for the Oak Development Trust that works out into this community from Riccarton Baptist Church. I'm married to Colin down there, and I have 4 adult children and only 6 grandchildren. Not up to 16 yet, Jim, but you know, I enjoy 6 grandchildren. And I guess as I've said before, I've been drawn to contemplative spirituality, which is part of this, what we're going to be looking at, and encountering God and His amazing love for that, in that, and through that. So, what we're going to do today, and for those of us as Jay, we always need a plan. So, we're going to, first of all, look at the concept around this is our iceberg. So we're going to have a little bit of look at what does that iceberg look like and what does it mean. And then we're going to look at, and because we're looking at emotionally unhealthy, we've got a condition here. So since I'm a nurse, we have to look at normal pathophysiology. So what is the place of emotions in life? What is the God-given place of emotions in life? Then we're going to look at a definition of emotional unhealthy spirituality. Then we're going to look at the symptoms of it. Then we're going to just have a little brief around the treatment. And if I was a good nurse, I would have written a nursing care plan and possible prevention. But that might be my last sermon. But first of all, we're starting with looking at our iceberg and understanding the concept of that as we start emotional healthy spirituality. It was June 1997, and I sat one Sunday evening in the living room of my parents' home. I was sitting beside my dad, and my mum was sitting on the other side. My dad was struggling with a low mood bordering onto depression. As a family, we had put on a 70th birthday party for him, which had caused him to become depressed. We so much wanted to celebrate his birthday and never thought that this would be the consequence. He had been a great father. He was gentle, kind, dependable, and caring. He had loved our mother and had given amazing support to her as she had cared for my handicapped brother. He had been a hard-working farmer, completing the job of bringing the land from bush into productive pasture that his father had started. He had provided well for his family. My dad was a man of deep faith and trust in Jesus, his Saviour and Lord. Every morning before heading out on the farm, he would kneel by his bed, read his Bible and pray. In fact, I can remember noticing the bedspread was threadbare where he placed his elbows. He would spend time in prayer again each evening. His older brother had been on a camp and heard the good news of Jesus, and Dad and all of his siblings had embraced the gift of forgiveness, love, and hope found in a personal relationship with Jesus in their 20s. That Sunday evening, I asked my dad where his thinking went to those dark moods he was experiencing. He shared how he had done something in his 20s which he had felt incredibly guilty about. I was grappling to find what was even wrong with it. It appeared, though, that this guilt and associated shame, possibly placed by angry words of his father, that was where his mind went to. I think it was that guilt and shame that meant he felt we should not have celebrated him as we did. I asked my father what he did when he felt so guilty in his 20s. He shared with me how he took a loaded gun to the bottom of the farm and shot himself. The bullet missed the heart, thankfully, but remained in the tissue. He went back, told his father what he had done, and spent the next 3 months in a mental institution. The event had never been spoken about until that night. My mother did not know. As I was trying to come to terms with what I'd just heard, my father asked me whether I still loved him now I knew this. I said I loved him even more because I knew his struggles and pain and what he had lived with. I would have liked to think we could have seen Dad released from that pain, that guilt, that shame. We went back to that place of his suicide attempt, took communion, thanking God it was a place of life, not death. We prayed with him and encouraged him to talk to God about this. For him, though, expressing faith was not to share weakness and vulnerability. In his responses as we chatted would be that God would not accept him in his weakness. He somehow had to look good, a lie many of us believe. Sadly, the depression engulfed him. He began to struggle to eat and lost weight over the next 2 years. And in August 1999, we as a family carried his coffin on our shoulders into the church that he loved in honour of the great father that he was to us, knowing too that he was free from the pain he'd carried all his life and contained through the busyness of life on the farm. 5 days before he died, he opened his eyes and appeared to see something of wonder. He lifted up his arms, an action he had not done for months because he was so weak. He gazed on something beautiful. Then he gave each of the family members present a hug of goodbye. This hidden shame and guilt that he carried all his life was a significant part of the iceberg below the surface of his life. Dad did not have the understanding that in his relationship with God, he could be weak and vulnerable and come to his brokenness and shame to our loving God. Yet Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." I have had to grieve that even though my dad was a great father, I am not sure I ever saw the person he had the potential to become. He was quite passive, never expressed his views and opinion, keeping much to himself. I don't believe he became fully the person God made him to be. Expressing emotions and being free to share my struggles was not an accepted part of my childhood either, also my Christian upbringing. In fact, I grew up believing emotions were never to be trusted and had limited value in life. They were on the edge and never had any place in the centre. And I've had to unlearn this as I've entered into my adult life. I have come to learn that emotions are beautiful gifts from God. Emotions such as anger, anxiety, and fear, even though sometimes they are difficult emotions to experience, often alert us to danger or something not quite being right. Joy and affection bring calm and a sense of well-being. Desire and longing cause us to search and hope. And so that's something of the iceberg, I guess, isn't it, really? But it's also, I want us to spend a couple of minutes now reflecting on your iceberg. What did you grow up believing about emotions and their place in your life? And as you come to this series, what are you aware of that lies within the hidden parts of your iceberg? And some of us are often not even aware of that and aware of how much it may affect us. But just for a couple of minutes, what did you grow up believing about emotions? But what's in your iceberg? What's the things that are down there that you hide? Because in an iceberg, we only see 10% of it. We've got another 90% that's often hidden below the surface of the water. So what we're going to look at now is Jesus and his emotions, because that's our normal pathophysiology. That's, Jesus showed us how you live a life where you express a wide range of emotions, and where they're actually at the centre, not at the edges, not to be disregarded, as was the place of my childhood and as I grow up. And how I've had to unlearn that. And I would say I'm still unlearning it. I still get surprised that I'm feeling an emotion and I haven't even recognised it. So we've got some passages up here now where Jesus expressed a whole wide range of emotions. And I'm just going to sort of talk to them. In John 11:36, that was the story when Lazarus had died and Jesus wept. And perhaps we don't really quite know why Jesus wept, because surely he knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. But I do wonder if he also, because being human, he saw death as such loss and such grief. And there's a sense in which death is so final. Our daughter lost her best friend to a brain tumour 8 years ago tomorrow. And I will always remember that defining phone call I got to tell me that death was that final for Fiona. And so perhaps Jesus had grief for the people around him, saw such pain. But Jesus expressed grief and loss as he wept. John 13, verse 1, and you can look these up this afternoon, was that sense of emotion. Jesus said that he wanted to show the disciples the extent of his love, so he went to wash their feet. And it was, so he loved, he deeply loved, which actually took him to a place of great service. Matthew 20:34 was when two blind men came and he had compassion. John 14, verse 9 was when Philip said, "Show us the Father and we will believe." And Jesus got exasperated. "Haven't you seen me? I have been here nearly 3 years. When you have seen me, you have seen the Father." And so there was a sense of exasperation in his voice as he did that. And then Luke 10:21 was in a dialogue where Jesus had joy, full of the Holy Spirit. And then it goes on in that verse to say the Father had great pleasure in sharing his truths with little children. So there's a sense of pleasure. But the one I want to ponder a few minutes on is John 2, 13 to 18. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found men selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple area, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. How dare you turn my Father's house into a market?" His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." Then the Jews demanded of him, "What miraculous sign can you show us to prove your authority to all of this?" And Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple and I will raise it again in 3 days." And so we see there that Jesus had a sense of anger. We can say it was a just anger. He saw his temple being abused. And so yes, he had a frustration too. So there's lots of probably, and we could probably talk a lot more about what was all the emotions that Jesus experienced that day. But he also had a compassion for those who were being used and abused at the money changers. A whole vast of emotions he had. But then he took a considered response. Emotion gave the energy to respond in a way, but it was a considered response, not a hasty response where he made a whip, and that would have taken quite a lot of time and to do something about it. And he summoned his authority and acted on that his Father's house should be not used like this. But also that action led him to invite faith in his disciples. Get these out of here, as he did this. But the disciples remembered that as written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." This was the man. His word was true. We can trust and we can put faith in him. So there's a sense in which we have a whole vast of emotions that God has given us, and they need to be at the centre, because that's who we are. We're human, is to feel, to be at the centre. They're gifts from God that we can have these emotions. And emotions are not opposed to reason. In fact, they are a mode of knowing. And it's often through our emotions that will propel us to do something because we've had those emotions. And sometimes it's a simple thing, like just as we're going to look at a few emotions ourselves in a moment, that sense of wonder can just take us to God. That sense of sadness can take us to prayer. And I know I've had anger that says, what should I do with it? What should be my response out of this? What am I being urged to do? What justice do I need to stand up for at this point? Or why am I anxious? And to actually say, what do I need to do about that? Or it may be that I just feel such love and somebody, and you think I just need to write them a card of thankfulness and appreciation. They give us a way of knowing and a way of a sensing of God working and moving in our lives and stirring us to do what he might be asking us to do. Now, on our sheets here, we've got the things we've been talking about, but a reflection. And just for a couple of minutes, I want you to think about some emotions you may have experienced this week. And I know for some people, they say, I just don't experience emotions, Well, we're only to experience emotion, we're human. So obviously you're not human if you don't experience emotions. So therefore, that's your problem, or I don't know. But anyway, have you this week? And I've got a couple of things, 4 lots of emotions, and what has that caused you to do, think, and act? So I've got 4 down here: admiration and awe, exasperation, sadness, and a sense of fulfillment. So what we're going to go on to now is looking at what is emotionally unhealthy spirituality. So we'll have that definition up. And it's actually a definition that's not found in your book, because it's my definition. It's come out of what I have understood emotional healthy spirituality to be. And I have pondered that emotional healthy spirituality occurs when we live our spiritual life, or life in general, without any attention or awareness of what is in our iceberg. And we can live out these symptoms in everyday life, assuming they are a healthy pattern of living. And the reality of it is that often we aren't even aware ourselves, because this is just the way I am. This is the way I felt all my life. You know, I never thought it would even be abnormal. And so we don't even be aware of that. And we've certainly never allowed the Lord to come in and look at some of those responses and some of those patterns, because we just think it's normal. And often we've been brought up at home to think that's just normal. This is a normal way of behaving and operating that isn't particularly at times loving and generous and God-honouring, but that's the way I am. And so often you hear people say, that's just the way I am, I can't change. And there's often no awareness of really what's going on in the iceberg. And as you heard the story of my dad, he lived a great life. I love him, I don't, but he had this iceberg. And I just have actually, as I've said, grieved for what he could have been if he had the tools and the way to have actually brought his iceberg to God. So that's my definition. I don't know what you think of it, whether out of your reading you think, it's a pretty okay one, you can live with that. And of course, after we made a definition, we look at the symptoms. And I know some of the symptoms we're going to look at in our life groups. I think we are. But I'm just wanting to speak to some of them today, and just to put some of my thoughts around them, and that might help you in your thinking as you look at your own iceberg and say, is that the way I act? Is that the way I respond? So the first one is using God to run from God. And usually it's around some of those attitudes of life of control. Well, God, I believe you should be answering my prayer because I've asked for it and I'm in control here, and there's that sense of wanting it my way. And instead of saying, God, I surrender to you, I don't know. I surrender. It doesn't have to be my will, it's your will. But in the name of God, we can still run from him. And a biggie, I think, for a lot of us is over time we've ignored emotions of anger, sadness, and fear. And often they've escalated in our lives to chronic moods, toxic behaviour, phobias. But for some reason we've allowed them just to be there because that's just the way we are. But often over time we find that they increase to other ways of being that also does not bring life. Just yesterday morning we were sent an email from a friend's wife. Her husband had a terrible cycling accident 9 months tomorrow, and he's in a coma. He's now been in a coma for 9 months, and we haven't heard too much through Facebook mainly, but there was an email yesterday morning giving him where he really was at, and he's obviously in a very deep coma, and not much response in 9 months. An amazing man, an amazing friend to us, amazing doctor. I've worked with him and just had such life and vitality about him. And it was her calling because their church is calling to a day of prayer and fasting for him for tomorrow. and calling their friends around the world, because he's in Australia, worldwide, to pray. But it took me sort of till lunchtime yesterday to own my sadness in that. I just feel so sad. And I guess I just felt it was good. We were walking on the beach at New Brighton to acknowledge my sadness, because tomorrow then I could pray. But I had to work through my own pain in getting that email yesterday morning. So I think we often just ignore, and it took me a surprise on the beach yesterday, thinking, I'm just feeling so sad about that. So we ignore so often those emotions, and that's one of the symptoms of emotionally unhealthy spirituality. Dying to the wrong things is the third one. And Luke 9, verse 23, if anyone must come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. I grew up with that verse, and you know what that verse would have meant to me? It would have meant I had to die to my desires, die to my God-given self, die to enjoyment, die to joy, and actually just get on and do the Christian life. You know, that's what it meant to me. What it means to me today is I don't have to die to any of those things. God, I can live to who I am. I can live to the joy around me and celebrate that. I can enjoy the things that give me a sense of nurture, and that's exciting. But the things that we weren't encouraged to deny ourselves of was our lack of vulnerability, or our defensiveness, or our desire for self-preservation about me. And those are the things we're called to deny, not life. And for me, that's been a huge change, and I sometimes feel I'm only just starting to live. The fourth one is denying the past's impact on the present. And I think really we're going to do a whole morning looking at going back to go forward. So I'm not going to really steal thunder here, but our past does impact the present, and we just cannot deny that. Positive and negative, and sometimes we have to see that there's been great positives in the past and have gratitude and thankfulness for that, and meet God in the gifts that they are. But there's also been other things that have affected our present that have not always been positive. Dividing life into secular and sacred compartments. I think we're good at that because it's part of the hiding that goes on. We put God here and we live our life there, and perhaps we don't believe that God wants to be in the totality of who we are. The next one is doing for God instead of being with God. And we're so busy. There was a time in my life, because I've been really quite good on this and on something else over the page, where I can have 2-hour segments free in a weekend, I remember, when I was doing district nursing and a few other things. And you're so busy because I feel God's calling me to this, you know, and that sense of being with him. And so it's been over the last few years that I have begun the journey of actually, how do I be with God? How do I relate to him in a way that I encounter his loving grace and work and being and presence for myself? And hopefully sometimes we don't quite have the tools to do that. And hopefully over the next few weeks we'll learn some of those tools. Spiritualizing away conflict. I want to say I'm just absolutely hopeless with conflict. It's not my strengths at all, you know? And of course, in my family, conflict was just, we were the peacemakers. Everybody was peace, you know? And I think we've been probably brought up a bit like that. For the sake of peace, I will do anything, you know? And that's the way I was brought up. And I've had to learn that that conflict actually is a very positive thing, because we can grow through it. I'm thankful that I've had children who, and even son-in-laws, by the way, who have actually challenged me at times and say, Cal, you shouldn't be, like this or this or this, And I'm thankful for the conflict that's been, because it's helped me grow, and it's helped me to say that actually conflict brings good, brings positive. Not nice always to be challenged at times, not nice to have different views that come often different value systems, but actually it brings a sense of health and wholeness. And but for me, the spiritualizing away conflict was that sense, well, we'll just be peacemakers. Jesus was a peacemaker, and I won't speak up. And I've got a friend who still does that within their marriage, and it's not a healthy marriage at all, not life-giving to both of them. And we cover over our brokenness, our weakness, and our failure, because that's just too hard sometimes to admit. I also think, as my dad did, we cover over's feelings of shame. And I know that in my life, I've lived with shame over events in my childhood. But then I would notice that those same responses would be in other relationships. And so you'd want to shy away from that too. And so it was only been at Easter time this year that Colin and I went away for 8 days. He had a couple of essays to write, so I didn't see him for 8 days. And I had all this time, and we were hidden in this place. If anybody knows where Blandswoods is, probably not, near Peel Forest. We were in this place surrounded by bush, didn't see anything, didn't have cell phone contact, TV, nothing. And I felt that this was my time to actually go back to those experiences of my childhood where I felt I was incredibly shamed. And so each morning I would get up and I would start writing, because I've been reading this book, Writing as a Way of Healing. And I think there's a real power in writing that I don't think we have tapped into yet. That the gift that God's given us into ability to express ourselves in writing is huge. And so I've been reading that book, so I thought I'm going to write those experiences. I'm going to write about those emotions I felt at that time. So for a number of mornings while we were there, I would sit on the deck and I would write. And I guess you leave a place like that believing, God, have you done anything? I've asked you into some of these deepest parts of my iceberg. Have you done any transformation? I long for you too. And that's what I longed for as I wrote, and I gave them as prayers and gifts to God. And so we left here and we've come back to life in the last 2 months, and I would notice there's 2 distinct changes. I first of all feel more secure about who I am. It's okay to be me, because shame actually is a very terrible thing, because it says I am defective. I'm not right in some way. I'm not normal. It's not that I haven't done something wrong. It's more than that. I am defective. And it's a terrible emotion to live with. And just the other week, as part of a leadership course that I'm involved in the city, and there's 4 of us from the Riccarton community in this leadership course, we began to be videoed, and we began to be videoed down at the community gardens. And then just last week, we were shown the video for the first time. And of course, my family knows I absolutely hate photos of myself, because nobody would want to look at me. I am utterly defective, and there's nothing nice about me to look at. And there's not many photos the family have. In fact, Anna and Clint have a whole wall of photos, and I'm not in them, because I hate having my photo taken, because there's something wrong. I repulse against myself. I have. So, of course, I'm holding myself like this when I'm watching this video, knowing it's going live to about 40 other leaders in the city the afternoon, and I look at myself and I thought, I'm actually not too bad. In fact, I'm okay. But it's been such a change of how I've felt all these years. And I could look at it amongst the other group as I saw it again for the second time and thought, not bad at all, I'm okay. So I've hidden that until this year. Living without limits, we're just going to end. I'm professional at that. Colin will tell you, yes to everything. But even though he'd tell me there's been lots of pain that I've caused Colin because I've said yes to others and no to him. And that's been a very painful thing for him. And I know I've been good at judging the spiritual journey of others. And often it comes out of a deep insecurity of where we're at, and that we don't treasure our spiritual journey for ourselves. So I just want you to reflect for a couple of minutes, because we're nearly ending, is what is the one symptom that is the most relevant in your life today? As we go through them, what is it you think, yeah, I do live without limits. Don't know how to say the word no. It's got 2 letters, but it's absolutely impossible. Or, yeah, I do hide so much in my iceberg. I live with shame. Or I live with a fear that takes over me. Or might be other patterns that you do. So just for a couple of minutes, just ponder upon what's your symptoms in this of this condition. And of course, on your sheet we've got the treatment. And this is what this course is all about: pursuing emotional health and contemplative spirituality, loving God well and letting Him love you, loving yourself well and generously, and sharing that love and generosity with others. I want to pray a blessing over us as we start this journey over the next 7 to 8 weeks. I've got copies of this blessing. If you would like a copy of it, to pray for yourself, because it can be a blessing for yourself as well as blessing for others. So I've got copies of that out there in the foyer. It's a blessing. May you sip contentedly from the fragrant wine of your life. May you stretch eagerly into the opening light of the day. May you discover kernels of wisdom hidden in unwanted experiences. May you find comfort and consolation when you are hurting. May you know the protection and guidance of your angels. May you hear the tender voice of the beloved calling you into the deepest part of your being. May you have a soul friend whose unconditional love gives you the courage to keep growing. May you be a bearer of loving kindness when you meet those who suffer. May you gather your daily blessings to your heart and relish their presence. May you never give up seeking greater peace for yourself and your world. May you go to sleep each evening aware of being held in the embrace of a merciful and welcoming God. May you hear the marvelous music singing in your soul every moment, lauding the exquisite gift of being alive. Thank you.